My name is Olga Maxwell. I'm a linguist. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Languages of Linguistics, the University of Melbourne, and I'll be chairing this event. So first of all, good morning, good day, good evening, where you are. So dear guests, it's a great pleasure to host this webinar today. First, I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement of the country. So I'd like to begin acknowledging that this event is organised in Australia, Melbourne, the land of Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of this land and where the University of Melbourne stands. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past and present. Thank you everyone in the audience for joining us today. So this is the fourth webinar in the series of 4 events, Ukraine Writes Back, Writers, Poets and the War. It is organised jointly by the Research Initiative of Post-Soviet Studies, Post-Soviet Initiative, Research Initiative on Post-Soviet Space at the University of Melbourne, and the Ukrainian Studies Association in Australia and New Zealand. So my colleagues and co-organisers of this event are Professor Marko Pavlishin, Professor Mykhed, Associate Professor Julie Fedor, Associate Professor Alessandra Achilli, and Dr. Irina Skubi. So in this webinar, The War We Speak, the Words We Choose, we will get to talk to Eugenia Kuznetsova and Oleksandr Mykhed. They will speak about making sense of everyday living amidst lost, displacement, erased childhood, and crushed memories of the life before. And yet, in the middle of so much trauma, children are born, couples get married, trees grow, books continue to be written. Oleksandr and Eugenia will reflect on their experiences, their writing, and also the place of language, politics, and history in the fate of Ukrainian families across generations. A couple of housekeeping matters before we proceed. We encourage everyone in the audience to use the Q&A button. It's right at the bottom of Zoom. So please post your questions throughout the webinar, and then my colleague, Dr. Irina Skubi, will help moderate the Q&A session. We'll have about an hour for the discussion, followed by Q&A. I also would like to mention that the recording of this event will be, this event will be recorded, and the first webinar is already available on the YouTube channel, and this one will also be available soon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests, distinguished speakers, Oleksandr Mykhed. Very succinctly puts in his biography, Oleksandr Mykhed is a writer. Until March 2022, he lived in Kiev. He's now enlisted in the armed forces of Ukraine. Oleksandr is the author of 10 books. Selected essays and excerpts from his books have been translated into 10 different languages. He's participated in literary residences in Finland, Latvia, Iceland, the US, France, and a virtual residency at the University of Oxford. He has written for publications including the Financial Times, Frankfurter, Allgemeine Zeitung, and excuse my pronunciation, The Guardian, and has appeared as the guest on CNN, NPR. He's a member of PEN Ukraine. I also would like to add that his book, which was published in 2020, I Will Mix Your Blood with Coal, Understanding Ukrainian East, has been finally published in English translation this year. Also, Oleksandr's book, The Language of War, has been translated into many languages already, and the very first chapter came out in the Financial Times. It was published early in March 2022. So welcome, Oleksandr.
Thank you so much.
Eugenia Kuznetsova, or Eugenia Kuznetsova, is a Ukrainian novelist, translator, and researcher. Her works explore themes such as family and society. Her debut novel got a special mention from the European Union Prize for Literature, while her second novel received a BBC Book of the Year prize. So she holds a PhD in International and Intercultural Studies from the University of Deusto in Spain. Eugenia has also authored a popular science book on languages in Soviet times, and I also would like to add that there is a YouTube channel that she leads, and she talks about different aspects of the book. Many of you will likely be familiar with her novels Спитайте Маєчку, Драбина, and her latest novel Вівці цілі, which was written during the all-out war, from what I understand, in the period of a very short period of a few months, and has been published this year. So welcome, Eugenia, welcome, Oleksandr. I'd like to start with a more general question today. So in quite a lot of prior interviews, you, when asked about writing, you often said that you need to write down everything. So you need to always take notes, even if you subsequently discard those notes. And it's really interesting because you have this compulsion to write everything, even if it doesn't make it to the book or an essay. Oleksandr, you've written across various genres. So you've written essays, you've written fiction, non-fiction, short stories. So I guess what I'm really interested in is, as a first question, how do you begin writing a book? So what do you start with? Do you have ideas that come to you? Do you know the characters, the places? Do you start at the beginning or do you start at the end?
Thanks for the invitations. Thanks for having me. That's a huge honor to be in such a great company. That's a great question because I'm in this state. I call it that we are in state of war, that we are under the Russian invasion. So general understanding of how the books are written, it totally collapsed since the February 2022. So everything I've done since that time, everything is really unexpected. These are not the books that were planned, and these are not like something that you are having the idea and you're developing it throughout the years, and you are waiting until you'll be prepared and you are researching in deep, and finally you're ready for sitting down and write. It didn't work like this for me, and the language of war started just in the first day of the invasion. I started taking notes, and I realized that the flow of ideas and the flow of the feelings, it should be written, because this is a huge new experience that I've never felt before, and I'd better try to grab the moment and encapsulate it in the text. And that gradually became my instrument of dealing with the invasion, as trying to put the chaos of invasion into the structure of the paragraph or the essay, and then in the architecture of the book, and trying to give at least some kind of explanation, at least to myself, of what's happened to myself, to everybody near me. Secondly, for example, the non-fiction fairy tale, as I call it, the Kotek, Pivnik, Shavka, the cat, the rooster, and the wardrobe, it pretends to be a fairy tale for 10 years old, 12 years old, but for sure this is a novella for adults about the occupation of Kiev region, and it was written during May 2022, and it was mainly made by accident, because I felt that the story of these three characters, the cat that was discovered in Borodyanka after the occupation, and the Mayolika rooster, which was found in Borodyanka, and as well as the wardrobe that survived in the demolished building. I felt that these are three great symbols that should be communicated to different generations, and for sure to the youngsters as well. So I did this fairy tale as some kind of mourning and some kind of trying to self-healing, and to say that at least it might be some kind of hope in the end. And it was the hardest part in the final chapter, to write about the future and to see it. And the third book that I did, it is the book about it's arranged in the alphabet, and this is a book for 6-year-old, 8-year-old, to explain what the armed forces of Ukraine are. And this is for sure not the book that might be planned in your strategic understanding of the path of your writing or something. This just you got the concept, you got the proposal, and you got the huge rage and urge to make it, and that's it. And to share this love, respect, and the understanding to the youngster audience. So if we would talk before the invasion and you would ask me, am I interested in writing for kids? I would say like, nah, never. But that's what happened. Like since that time, I made two books for kids, and that's how it works. And now I'm working on the second chapter of the Language of War, the second volume. And for sure, this is something that it's just happening because nonfiction, as the docu movie, it just happened. The life happens itself. The invasion happens as it is, and it's just you're just trying to grab the reality in these paragraphs. So that's total mess. That what happens in my writing.
Mm. Mhm. Thank you. Thank you.
I would just add, Olga, to this question that in Ukraine we now have this discussion whether we have to write in general. Some even blame writers for writing, just because, especially when it comes to fiction, many people say that we have to wait until it ripes, until it's ready. But I think that if, like Sashko and I, we are lucky that we haven't lost our ability to write, because there are many authors in Ukraine who, especially in the first year of war, they just could not write. They had this block. They were so overwhelmed. Like, we are different people. We have different minds. We have different adaptive abilities. And some people just could not write at all. And since I, and like Oleksandr as well, since we are lucky that we haven't lost this ability to write, I think that this is our debt. We have to write that. And also what I notice that if you don't write in the immediate aftermath of the events, the details, they are getting lost so quickly, so quickly. Like my novel Drabina, the letter, that I wrote it in in summer 22. And I now, while reading, I'm now preparing a fragment to read for the event. And now, when I'm reading the book, I forgot many details that I wrote down in that book. And the book is about the first weeks of the invasion. And I think that the details are they really matter, just because details, that's what make the books, the text, especially fiction, but non-fiction as well, they make those books alive. They make those books interesting, sometimes in a scary way interesting, yeah, but dramatic, because details, they really matter. This is a sign of a good writing, if you have enough details in your writing. So I think it's important to write, and it's important to take those notes, as you mentioned in your question, that you're taking notes all the time. And at the same time, I think that I can't help but writing. This is my way of processing this dramatic reality, and I think that that's the only way how I can deal with this new reality, is to write.
I would just add a small thing that it's I've spoke to some writers and this about myself as well, that it's getting really harder to write because the density of the trauma and the density of the tragedy is so high that your ability to think and your ability to formulate the first draft, it's getting really and really hard because your lack not even of words, but your lack like short memory, and the style is really harsh, and you like usually I would make the first draft, and the first draft is almost the final one, but now I have to make the first draft, second draft, third draft to polish it, because I could not make it in a proper way, because I'm like it's getting really hard. And your lack of power, your lack of mm, yeah. So that's a new problem that's appearing in this.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, and you've already touched on this because I was thinking as the next question, because you talked, especially you, Oleksandr, you talked about, you know, having this mess, right, in writing, and you've spoken in some of your interviews about writing in fragments, in the rhythm of chaos, one atrocity, one fragment after another. And yeah, the approach, though you talked about the approach that has changed, but in what way do you think your writing has changed, sort of pre-war, post-war, more generally in terms of the rhythm of your writing, in terms of the tone, in terms of how you sort of find your footing when you write? So just a follow-up question.
Yeah, I usually I call this the eye of war because we have the war in our eye, and this is the only optics that we have right now, and it totally changes your understanding of the values. It totally changes your understanding, for example, the world classics, because you see things that you haven't seen before. You understand what probably you better understanding what happened in the World War II, you understand what happened in the World War One, you understand what happened to Ukrainian patriots throughout decades of Soviet occupation, you understand what happened even in 19th century, etc. So this gives you a really interesting understanding of being in the flow of different epochs, and you're really feeling this. And so this is the core of what changed, and then you're trying to transfer this into your writing. And while I'm like now, one of the most interesting things for myself is rereading the classics. And this summer I've reread the J.D. Salinger Catcher in the Rye for the first time since the high school, and this was so interesting because I see human being that was traumatized by war, and this is for sure the experience of Salinger that was transferred into the teenager's voice. And this is like that's what happened. And for sure this is supposed to be transferred into writing. And the one thing is the thing that you've said about the rhythm and the chapters, the short paragraphs of how it is made. But on the other hand, the writing is more conscious in terms of feelings, and the feelings that I like to touch, because I understand that some of my audience is traumatized in Ukraine. I understand that I have to touch the heart and mind of my readers in West, so they would better grab the understanding of what's happening. And as well as I understand that I choose the subject of what I'd like to write about based on the feelings of rage to the enemy and to love to those who are around me. And this is totally different approach. And when I'm in the international readings and I listen to my colleagues, fellow writers from different countries, I understand that the Ukrainian literature is totally different, and we don't have time to write about consumerism. We don't have time to write about some issues that were important in the early 2000s or something like that. We have our own issues that we are supposed to talk about and to deal with.
Thank you, thank you.
To me, the writing got scarier just because I write ironic prose. I deal a lot with humor, and it's just got scarier to deal with humor, because all the time you have this thought in the back of your mind that you have to be not too black, not too light in terms of humor, just because your writing may traumatize someone, your writing may enhance some traumas that they already have. And that's why, and it is very difficult and very scary to joke in this reality. just because it's but if you don't write without jokes, so you have two options, whether to write those jokes and be afraid of the reactions, be afraid of how people would perceive your writing, either, or as another option, you could just stop writing. That's just two options, the two options that you have. So to me, it was very difficult to write my second book because I had this panic all the time that maybe the book will not be perceived as it is. Maybe black humor is not it's not time for these things. But I know in Ukrainian audience that in the first weeks of war and also now as well, humor is a very important tool for Ukrainians, and it's an important tool for survival of the. I don't think that would be able to survive the first weeks without all those endless memes and jokes that we've been like posting and creating as a society during the first weeks. So I had this in my mind, but at the same time, it was a scary process, and I was very anxious about the novel when it came out, how it will be perceived. So in this regard, my writing has changed, but in other aspects, I would not say that it has changed as a process because I'm a quick writer in general. Also, I can't say if I changed a lot because I am, as an author, I am a young author because my first book just came out in 2020. My first novel came out in 2021. I don't know myself as an author, as a pre-war author. So I don't know whether it's a normal process of writing or it's not, whether it's okay in the writer's world to write a novel in a month, having a newborn baby and three kids that you are hosting because of the war at home. Maybe that's something extraordinary. That's what I'm starting thinking because when I'm asked at some events, what conditions do you need to write? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know, things that I wrote that I had all conditions for not writing, but still I was able to write something. So I think that, and this is also a question that we have to think now about the younger generations, because we have the entire generation of military authors that they did not know themselves as authors before the war. They are war authors. They were born as war authors. And that's in their future, they will have to understand themselves and their process of writing and how normal is it, I think. My suggestion that this writing and this reality is just not normal in general.
And I would like to add that the books that Eugenia wrote, they are now in the like each month they are bestsellers in each bookshop. With the Spytajte Mykhed, the first one, it's just a constant bestseller, and you see that the audience um, is ready for this kind of I would not say escapism, but something that gives you a really good feeling good prose. And this is so important to have this books that give you this harbor, that gives you this feelings. And for sure, like readers do need these kind of writings with the jokes, as well as this, I don't know, the lullaby from the author who understand that they are really traumatized and somebody should care about them.
Yeah, sometimes I feel really sorry for myself and for those authors who work in the genre of feel-good fiction because it's so difficult to write feel-good texts at the moment that you just can't do that. So I'm really happy that I had the opportunity and that I was able and managed to write my first novel before the war. It went out in 2021, just because I know that myself now I wouldn't be able to write this text now, and I'm happy that it's popular just because people, as Sashko said, they are looking for this escape escape fiction. At the same time, with my third novel, I think that I failed to write a feel-good fiction just because the reality is so not feel-good that even though I had in my mind Christmas novel that would be family, would be some difficult dilemmas, but still it came out very melancholic. I did not plan it to be like that, but still there is anxiety, melancholy, and also some general feeling of hopelessness in this book. And I didn't want it to be like that, but that's I don't think that I can influence that a lot.
It still has warmth. It still has warmth. Um, do you have moments, you probably do, and what do you do in those moments when you feel like you just need to stop when you're in the process of writing, and because there is such an emotional and physical toll, right, that it takes on your body and you. So what do you do in instances like that?
Well, I think Sashko for sure has these moments because his prose and his nonfiction has like readers have to stop at many points in like in The Language of War. I had to stop multiple times, and I'm very happy that this book is divided in those chunks that you have. Like each time you have a portion, like a spoon of this, and then you have this legal right to stop and to start the new paragraph with some time distance. So when it comes to fiction, to my own writing, I don't think that I have this need, since because it's fiction and it's not that integrated into reality.
Yeah, you just stop, and that's it. Okay, you just stop. But sometimes it's when the subject is so horrible that you could not imagine it, or you could not speak about it. You just put it the simplest way. You just put the simplest constructions as possible, as you don't have to you don't have to artistically put it. You don't have to stylize it. You just put it in the present simplest way as it's possible, and just to put it in paper. During the work on The Language of War, there were some chapters that I've just re-edited in terms of cutting, feeling that that's too much. And as this is always, you're trying to find the balance, how to deliver a message, but how to not to put it too much pressure on the reader. As well as in The Language of War, there is these chapters of the chronicles of the war crimes committed by Russians on Ukrainian territories. And that was one of the biggest challenges, because for sure this is like 20% of the information that we got, me and my colleague Roxolana Hera, who helped me in getting this chronicle together. As I realized that I should give this portions, to give the pause for my reader, and just to grasp an air and not to go into very details. So it's always trying to find this balance, and that's why I try not to reread this book, for example, and that's why I don't read chapters from it during the discussions, because this is this capsule of this time of the first 13 months as it was, and as I tried to show it to my readers.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would just add a little note here, a side note about all the stories that we have, that In one of the recent novels by Lubko Dereš, he is a teacher he's a writing teacher, so he participates in those writing courses as an instructor, and he described a very interesting scene of participating from his own experience, I suppose, but of course it's a part of fiction book, but I think that it's his first-hand experience as a writing instructor, that so many stories and so many people that who want to tell their stories, but these stories are so similar, and this is such a challenge for those who have this urge to share their stories, but then they realize that this story of about escaping occupation, for example, there are dozens and dozens and hundreds of these stories, and even those literary courses, there are several people with the same story and with the same urge to write this story, to share the story with the audience, and that's also that's a challenge for Ukrainian literary. I don't want to say the word market, but maybe even the literary market or literary scene, that so many stories that we are trying to tell about the war, especially if they are fictionalized, if they're put they're put in fiction, that they are very similar, and it's very hard for the authors then to realize that they have to look for unique approach. They have to look for details, because just this plot, I think that's what nonfiction does, and it does it perfectly fine. I mean, that's probably it's the only possible way to deal with those dramatic, extra dramatic stories. Like Oleksandr says, that it's you don't need metaphors, you don't need style, you just put it like it is, and it is strong enough and dramatic enough, just like it is. So that's one of the challenges of Ukrainian literary scene at the moment.
Thank you, Eugenia. It brings me to another question, because there are so many voices that I think Ukrainians want to be heard, and I think Professor Marko Pavlishin mentioned that there was a literary evening where Ukrainian, Australian, Ukrainian, New Zealand writers, not necessarily established writers, shared their writing. But what I'd like to ask now is that, Eugenia, you quite often focus on family. You talk about family sort of history, and then in your book, The Language of War, Oleksandr, you also reflect on history and Russification and all those sort of past of Ukraine. And I'm wondering, so because both of you draw on this, how do you see your writing as part of the continuum of Ukrainian voices across generations? So how does the memory of past erasures, centuries of Russification, for example, what happened during the Soviet Union, shape the urgency of your work today? So not just in the context of the war, but I mean in general. Who would like to start?
Let me start. The thing is, I mentioned before that the invasion gives you a clear understanding of your connection with the previous generations of writers and the artists, and this is so important. And you understand how it was on the totally different level, and it gives me a huge interest in rediscovering this in my with this newly born eye of war, and how I can reread the classical writings, and it gives me totally new perspective. For example, one of my favorite writers is Grigor Tutunnik, a really famous short story writer from 1960s. And usually I would say that before the invasion, I would say that these are writings about the people who are living in the village, or they were brought from village to this Soviet towns, Soviet reality, and that's what happened in their small life with their daily dramas. But since the invasion, I consider these writings as the stories about the people who are trying to survive on the ashes of the World War II. And I consider this as some kind of post-apocalyptic prose, as everything burned down. Those are people who are traumatized. They're living through their PTSD flashbacks from the action of World War II. And now I consider these writings as some kind of the roadmap for Ukrainians, what might be next for us. And this is so interesting because I understand that these writings, they are not something abstract. They are really realistic about right here and right now. And secondly, my major studies, I major in the Russian literature, and my writings and my understanding of the Russification and the processes that happened in the Russian literature during Soviet time and what happened in the 2000s, it gives another understanding and the perspective of how it works through the pro-imperialist view with the anti-imperialist view and how it works inside of it. But and as well as it gives now we started during the early stage of the invasion, Ukrainian intellectuals, public speakers, we would usually say that please ban Russian classics, please stop engaging in projects with Russian intellectuals, etc. But now it's almost 4 years into invasion, and we understand that the Western audience, Western academia, they are not prepared for totally ban the Russian classical literature and Russian contemporary writers. So now I say that if you could not stop reading this, please read it at least with the critical eye, and please be at least critical to understand why these books they are foundation for different genocides and different wars that Russia started in the late 90s and throughout all the 2 decades of Putin in power. So this is something just to start with.
Thank you, Eugenia.
Yeah, as you mentioned during the intro, that I wrote this the book about the Soviet language policies, and it felt to myself, it felt, yeah, as a I define myself, I identify myself as a fiction writer in the first place, but still I had this internal doubt that I have to do this. And this book started, by the way, thanks to my sister who works with international journalists, and she was working, for instance, in Kharkiv, in Kramatorsk, in Slovyansk, in Severodonetsk, when it was still not under Russian occupation. And she's been working with these international journalists who have been telling her that, why do you keep denying the reality? You are a bilingual country. You have Russian-speaking East, you have Ukrainian-speaking West, you have some mixture in the center, but don't deny the reality. That's your reality. You have to embrace it. You have to set these two-state languages, and that's it. And my sister was telling me that, look, like, internally, I understand that they are very wrong, and I am very frustrated and stressed from these conversations because I don't have those arguments. So could you please write a brief op-ed about that, so I could just drop them a link so that they would understand why are we not a bilingual country, why they would understand this post-colonial reality that we have. Why do we have to support just one state language, and this is the how it can survive, and this is the only way it can survive? I said, okay, no problem, I will write an op-ed. But as a result, I wrote like a 400 pages book, just because it was so difficult to briefly write what's the problem, to briefly explain what's the problem. And then at some point, I just thought that it's so important to get out of my own bubble of those people who internally understand, like my sister does. Maybe she doesn't have all those historical background, and she can't voice all those arguments, but still internally she understands our reality. She has this intuition. But then I thought that it's very important to get out of this bubble, like Sashko and his father did this book. I think it's also an act of, especially for your father, who is just like a professor, and of course you did a podcast together, but still, I think for him it's a social act of explaining something to those who would not listen otherwise. So, and my book it's very simplified. Sometimes I got criticized that no, like people who have been researching this topic for years would not find anything new there. Okay, that was my goal. That I did not write a book for experts. I did not write the book to get just thousands likes from those people who already agree with me. I would love to, and by the way, that's why I didn't use the word Sovietsky, I mean in Ukrainian transliteration on the cover, because we are now trying to avoid using Radyansky, just to show that Sovietsky Soyuz was like occupying force. But still, my intention was not to scare off anyone from this book. I wanted to be as simple and as neutral as possible, in a very neutral, simple words, to explain the entire system of the Soviet Empire and entire social relations that led to the situation when my sister comes to Kharkiv and she's been told that don't deny the reality, that the reality you have, so you have just to accept it.
And just for the audiences, I wanted to add that you were talking about your book Mova Mech. Mova Mech, language is a sword, if we translate. Yeah, I think this is quite probably, well, this is an urgent topic currently because of this whole idea that, you know, the politicization of Russian language and Ukrainian language. And I think I'd like to just read a quote from philosopher Jacques Derrida, who was a Sephardic Jewish, well, he was born to Sephardic Jewish parents in colonial Algeria and grew up speaking French. I think many Ukrainians could probably echo with this quote, sort of relate to this quote. I only have one language and it's not mine. I'm monolingual. My monolingualism feels like one to me, and I remain in it and inhabit it. It inhabits me. This monolingualism is me. I would not be myself outside it. It constitutes me, yet it will never be mine, this language. I thought of this quote after listening to your YouTube channel and sort of getting more familiar with the book as well. Thank you. So what I also would like to ask, and I think the audiences would like to know your sort of more personally, because Oleksandr, you enlisted into the armed forces of Ukraine straight after, well, soon after the full-scale invasion. Eugenia, you share your life, you know, between the two countries. And what I'm interested in is you do identify yourself as writers. So Oleksandr, you often call yourself first and foremost a writer. Eugenia, you've described writing as a form of being. But in the context of the war, what does it mean to hold on to the identity of the writer? How does your identity of writer interact with your other selves? Soldier, translator, so you do quite a lot of translation, researcher, also mother, husband.
This is something that I realized during, I think, the first days of the invasion, that when you're losing everything, what might be left, and this is really interesting because that happened in the during the first time I felt this during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, when all the projects, everything was stopped, all the funding was on pause, and all of a sudden you were just by yourself. And what are you supposed to do in the world where nothing happens? And all of a sudden you realize that the only thing that could not be taken out of you is that you're a writer. And the same, that was the first time I felt it really sharp, and the Russian invasion reminded and fundamented it in a really cemented it on a really dramatic way. So when the whole your previous life is disrupting, and when you're losing everything material, that's the question: what is immaterial, what could not be taken out of you? And this is the only thing that lives with myself, because in the terms of the material way, that was really interesting how it's your life is in the urgency backpack, and you have all the documents, your computer, laptop, and socks, and that's it that you have. Then when you are in the armed forces, you have everything you need is just your phone and your soldier's document, because these are two things that you're grabbing during the air alert, and that's you're supposed to grab this as quickly as it's possible and be in the shelter. And this is the core of the identity. And then throughout these years I realized that I'm not ready to get back to the previous functions in the society, being whatever I've did before, and the only thing that is left, this just telling the stories. And this is the thing that in the being in the genocidal invasion, you don't have the category of future. You don't understand what's next, because you don't understand for how long the war will be. You don't understand for how long will you be in the serving the army, and you're just trying to imagine something, but you could not imagine is this gonna be in 5 years, or this gonna be in the next 2 decades, or how it works. And then you understand that the only thing that is left is just your partner, which is near you, and the second is just the stories that you'd like to tell. And hopefully, I will be still able to tell these stories, and that's it.
Thank you, Oleksandr. Eugenia?
To me, I think it's a very maybe it may sound wrong that it's a very ego-centered thing to me, that it's my way of survival. I think that if not writing, my mind would just blow up, because you have so much to process, that this is just the way how I process the reality. Maybe it's self-therapy, I don't know. But especially when you maybe it's not a nice thing to say, especially if you are framed as a feel-good fiction writer, that you mostly write out of suffering. Maybe that's not the right thing to do, but still it's just I write to avoid suffering, because if I don't write, that makes me feel that makes me suffer, basically. That I need that to process my own life and to process what I'm seeing now. Maybe if I would be lucky not to be born in these dramatic times for Ukraine, maybe I would write different things. But that's funny that I just noticed some months ago that my three probably favorite novels that I would name, like my three favorite books, are all, first, they are funny and they are about the war. And that was a very striking thing to me, because I didn't expect them to be like that. I mean that I love Yaroslav Hasek, The Adventures of the Brave Soldier, and also I love Celine, The Journey to the End of the Night, and it's also about the war. And I love the novel by Haller, Catch 22. Those are like three novels that are funny and they are about the war. So this is just to me, this is just the process of avoiding suffering.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you mind sharing with the audiences a little bit about your book, Vivci Cili, how it came about? Because I think you wrote it over 3 months, and correct me if I got it wrong. And just, what are the characters and what prompted the book? Particular story, not the book, but the stories.
Yeah, that's not a strange thing to me, because as I mentioned before, that I'm a quick writer. I may be a slow thinker, so I'm like thinking, having this feeling of the book with me. But when it comes to me, I just sit and write. I don't have those like writer's blocks. So normally, maybe in the future, I will have that. Let's not be very optimistic about that. But in general, this is basically an aftermath of my. I stayed with my grandma and my mom in the village in November and December 22, and it was those times of blackouts, and it struck me how close we were back then, because we also hosted the entire family from Zaporizhia, my aunt, my uncle, their daughter, and their son. So we had this full house of different people with different backgrounds. We are still family, but we did not expect to be living together. So and at the same time, we had no electricity. We had this generator in the garage. We had to somehow deal with this new, very black reality. We had those flashbacks to 90s and early 2000s, for when there were also blackouts in Ukrainian villages mostly. But back then I lived in the village, so I remember that very well. So it was basically that the feeling I wanted to bring. But of course, when you have this feeling, then characters start coming to you, then you live with those imaginary characters, then you understand what challenges they are facing, they get to know you and your characters, you get to know each other, and then you just sit and write what I did. But I really hoped it to be more optimistic. I hoped it to be Christmas reading. We lack that very much in our literature, in Ukrainian literacy at the moment. That I think many cultures have this feel-good Christmas reading that people get back to each year. In Ukraine, we really, really like that. I hoped to do that, but I failed. So. Maybe future generations will do that for us.
Thank you, Eugenia. Because we started a little bit later, I think I'll give it a few more minutes, so that we have a couple more questions. I'd like to ask, because we talked about language, but without going into the actual politics of language, I'm quite interested what you've noticed about the transformations in language use in Ukrainian language, because especially since February 2022, there's been a surge of new words, shifts in tone, changes in how people speak, different expressions. So what kind of changes in the Ukrainian language have struck you most? And Oleksandr, you play with words quite a lot. Is it in a very cynical way in the language of war?
Yeah, it works in different ways. And first of all, there is a huge echo of the World War II in the daily vocabulary. with all kind of terms that are supposed to describe this invasion, starting with the Gauleiter, which are the how you call it, the minions of Russians who are picked up as the mayors of the occupied cities, and this is just to give an example. Zachistka, the Russian word, the term for exterminating everybody, the filtration camps is the same that Russia is bringing into occupied territories. So this is like totally works from the World War II vocabulary. Secondly, for sure, this is about the language that became really expressive in the harsh way with the during the first war of invasion, it was almost okay for everybody to swear, and the swearing became, in a certain way, even the official language with the famous Russian worship and with everything that was, in a way, the national ideology that helped survive the nation during the first phase of the invasion. For sure, there are a lot of new stuff that appeared, as well as the now we're learning how to call different types of the Russian armory and what's their instruments for killing Ukrainians. And when the first Shaheds appeared, they were called balalaikas. Then they were called the how you call it, moped, the motorcycles, because they had this crazy sounds. But in a way, Ukrainian language as well as the Ukrainian society unfortunately got accustomed to this, and it stopped with this inventing new words, because Shahed is just Shahed and it's supposed to be called as it is, and nobody should forget that the Russia is the cause of this genocide, as well as in the beginning of invasion, usually you would hear different terms invented for calling Russians, and the orcs is one of the simplest ones, but still on the first, it's forced almost 4 years into invasion, and again. It is so important to call Russians Russians, and to call this that the invasion has its own those who make it, and these are Russians. And I think this is so important to remind. This is not something connected to your question, but I think this is so important to remind that the narrative about the Putin's war is one of the most harmful narratives, because this is the war that is made by the Russian nation, and these are the people that are supposed to be blamed, and these are the people that are supposed to go through the tribunals, not only the one who is the head of the state and who is the mirror for their feelings and their understanding of what they would like to see the reality and the invasion, but this invasion is made by the hands and minds of hundreds of thousands of Russians on the daily basis.
I would just add in connection to what Oleksandr said that I think that Ukrainian is getting more direct in these years, and it's also very interesting to me. I before the full scale invasion, I've been involved in a project that researched the language of the local press of the occupied territories. And also I had the project where I researched those Russian Telegram channels. So I know a bit about how they put that, about their language. Of course, that's an extremely interesting topic for the research. And I really, as I still try to avoid researching that myself, but now I'm getting desperate now because I think that sooner or later, maybe I will have to do that, even though I would like to outsource that to someone else. That's a very interesting topic because as a Ukrainian language is getting more direct, as Oleksandr said, that at first we were more about mocking about like Russians, enemies, and also mocking the weapons that have been killing us all these years. But then we got more into direct language, like calling things as they are. While in Russian discourse, the process is quite the opposite because all the time they try to use as indirect language as possible. Like they don't call explosions explosions. They even don't call the air alert air alert. They try to pick different different words that would not sound so alarming. So that's a very interesting topic to compare these two processes, and maybe that's also we can get some insights about this relation of the aggressor and the victim, because that's something that we can really dig into. Also, I think that Ukrainians started swearing much more than before, like swearing. Swearing in general, like in Soviet Union, swearing was banned. You would never ever see a printed swear word in the Soviet Union. It was like a shadow lexicon that was used in some circles, but you would never this part of language they like in the Soviet linguistics pretended it did not exist at all. So, but now in Ukraine is starting to reviving it's this lexicon and swear words, and it got more socially acceptable to use these strong words in different aspects. You can even see that while, I don't know, watching some interviews with famous people, that before it would not be just acceptable for them to use those rude words, and now it's acceptable. That's just something that we have to take into consideration, that's how recent events are changing us.
Thank you, Eugenia. And I also wanted to add, when you talk about well, both you and Oleksandr, about directness, I think there's also creativity that comes with directness as well, right? I'd like to ask one more question so that we can move to the Q&A part. I actually am going to ask, I would like to finish on a positive note, and I'd like to ask a question. If you're currently reading a book, what are you reading, or what was the last book that you've read?
I have a huge I'm a huge fan. I've discovered the Polish writer whose name is Szczepan Twardoch, and his 4 books are translated into Ukrainian. And this is one of the strongest impressions I've got throughout a really long time. And I've been really into this. And this year, Szczepan Twardoch made the novel about the Russian invasion, and it's called Null and Zero. And I'm really waiting for the Ukrainian translation, because our colleagues who read this in Polish, they are really impressed how it's made, and it's made with the from the point of view of the Ukrainian soldier, and it's usually he makes a really interesting vocabulary for each book, and this vocabulary is made as a mixture of the Polish and Ukrainian language, and I'm really curious to see it. As well as I've got a huge struck by the collection of short stories and essays by Artur Droń. Hemingway didn't know nothing or anything. And this is a really new page in terms of the speaking about the invasion, and this is a great new voice in Ukrainian literature.
Thank you, Oleksandr.
And in order to raise money for the armed forces, I do 3 editing projects. I mean, 2 editing projects, and I have an extra editing project. So for now, I read mostly for work. I edit 2 novels, one about Zaporizhia, another one about bike tour, and also just to get some rest, I edit a book by 2 military surgeons. Who are now in the field, and this is a beautiful writing. I hope that they will finish writing this book, and this book is just brilliant. It's not fiction, it's like a handbook for medical students, but from those who have been operating in the field during these 4 years. That's I really have big hopes for this book. And also, just now I read Shevchuk, Dim na Hori. It's the house on the mountain. It's just beautiful, beautiful writing. And if you want to have, sometimes when you are editing, you are getting really tired of mixing these words together, of this chaos of editing. And just to rest, I have this book, and it's so beautifully written, so flowing, so nicely done. So that's my way to have strength to edit after that.
Thank you so much for sharing, and we'll close the part of the conversation. Thank you so much. It was absolute pleasure to speak with you and get I'm sure the audience appreciated to get to know you better. I'm going to hand over to Irina now to moderate the questions, and please, I'd like to invite audience to put questions in Q&A. It's just a little box at the bottom of Zoom.
Thank you, Ola, thank you, Eugenia and Oleksandr, for sharing your beautiful reflections about your process of writing and thinking. I guess it's a huge gift from you to all of us and the audience to learn how the process of writing. I would like to open the Q&A session with the comments that we already have in the chat, and also invite others to either raise hands, as Olga mentioned, or put your question in the chat. So we have Tatiana Bogachenko. She writes, "Greetings from Perth, Western Australia. Thank you so much for such insightful and poignant discussion, Olga and Oleksandr and Eugenia. Thank you for your courage and hard work as you keep writing despite enormous challenges, and for sharing your expressions boldly and honestly. Words and text indeed hold a lot of power and provide opportunities to impact and challenge thinking, worldviews, and decision-making. Is it possible to buy your books in Australia? If not, how can we order them and promote through our networks, both in Ukrainian and English? Respectfully, Tatiana.
The language of war is available worldwide due to wide penguin possibilities. I think it might be even acquired in your local bookshop, I think, because we have a distribution over there. But for sure, it's available through the Amazon, as well as the newly published US edition of the I Will Mix Your Blood with Coal, my nonfiction about 6 cities of Donetsk and Luhansk region, should be available through the Amazon as well. I'm not sure that it will be in your local bookshop because it's a small university press, but for sure it will be available through the Amazon.
As for me, I don't have English translations yet. I just have yesterday we have announced a pre-order for my first English book. It's a humorous book about Ukrainians, about ironic anthropology, how I define this genre. But I don't think that you are able to get those books in Australia. But I would like to say that we ship to Australia. And Ukrposhta, Ukrainian Post, does it very surprisingly well. Maybe the price is a bit high for posting, but still, they even amidst the war, I'm amazed how Ukrposhta does international shipping.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your advice with us. And yeah, I'm sure the numbers of purchases and books sent by Ukrposhta to Australia will be rising after this webinar. And do we have any raised hands? I saw briefly that Lisa Walter raised hand. Yes, please talk. Lisa, you can ask question yourself. I think you are able now to do that. Yeah, you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm very sorry I did some. All right, that I'm now. Thank you very much for your nice talk. And I'm not from Australia. That I'm here through the Vision Ukrainas, from the network of the German researchers, where Dr. Maxwell is also the participant, and we received an invitation. But anyway, I'm also very thankful for your book advices. And here, since the Twardog books, sorry, I just started from my last point. Yeah, so I noted. Put some notes. First, I want to give a small comment. I did read the book of Stepan Twardog, Null, and I'm really as well as Oleksandr waiting for the Ukrainian translation, because I'm talking about this to all my Ukrainian friends, and I say that this book is I'm Ukrainian background, and for me was much easier to start reading this book knowing that it's not written from the Ukrainian soldiers, because although my collection is a book of Artem Czech here and Artem Chapai, I have them in German and in Ukrainian, but somehow I don't have mental Kraft. I don't have mental powers. I'm afraid of this book that I will not mentally survive, that it will put me into a month of and surprisingly the book of Twardog, because he is not Ukrainian, I was not afraid. Yeah, because it is somehow in my mind was he's an outsider. Yeah, like so let me check if he writes right. So this is what my voice in some way when I opened the book, and I read it in Polish, and I don't know why I cannot open the video here, so I would show you. I have so many markings here in the book with the quotes where he talks about the history of Ukrainians, yeah, and he answers immediately everything which should be answers, the questions in the Polish society, the propaganda questions about using the questions of last century, yeah, in historical question. He dismisses all this stupid sorry for the direct language, for all the stupid narratives. He dismisses them in his book through the family history of this Ukrainian soldier. Yeah, so he depicting his sister and his father and his grandfather and his own way. Yeah, I mean the protagonist. So. I think it will be great instrument, and and I am, as a reader, I'm really such a reader, like, oh, let me see, oh, this is wrong, but with this book I cannot say anything, even not I mean I'm absolutely, as Oleksandr, admire because for me, living outside of Ukraine, I see that it will be a great instrument to bring very, very fast and very clearly understand a bit more of understanding of Ukrainian war and how it's going on. Sorry, this is the last, and I also put some notes about the different language and direct and indirect, and I think really a lot about this. And even somebody sent me a funny picture of monobank, you know, like when the transition of money was like something didn't and there is monobank also, but I somehow cannot put it in the chat. My chat is deactivated.
I'm sorry, Lisa. Can you ask questions? So we just
Yes.
have a number of follow questions from other
yes.
guests.
Excuse me. Yes, I have a question. So, do you think it's both for Eugenia and Oleksandr, and I think I have to also put it this way, that I'm very thankful that you publishing your books, that you're working for this, because I know also that it's very difficult also, you know, to keep on publishing, keep on writing and keep on publishing and keep on talking about these important issues. Yeah, I also read both books of Eugenia, and I think we even were on the book club here in Leipzig, in Germany, and on Oleksandr, because I'm from Luhansk. I read his book also on Zmішать мою кров з вугіллям. My question is it for you also the issue, or how you go through, how you put yourself together for the talks about very painful topics? Because from the international society, I'm living here in Germany, sometimes Germans ask me very direct questions, like, because they're curious, and I they don't mean it bad, they're just like curious, but ask me such questions which hit me in the wound, like how you do it, especially for the international audience. And thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
I would just quickly answer that in most cases I don't. I mean that I avoid public speaking as much as I can, but still, of course, I feel this as my debt, that I have to participate in some events. And I think that the tool that Oleksandr mentioned already, that you just put it in simple words. You don't need to explain much. If you are talking about such tragic events, if you're talking about scary stuff, you just tell it as it is. I think that's the only way to do that.
Yeah, this is something about depersonalization. This is something that you just have some kind of persona that's supposed to talk smart, and then your inner self, who cares what happens to your inner self? Do you just have a persona that double for yourself that works in these kind of talks, and that's it? And then this is just a matter of time to get yourself together after this, and that's how it works. So basically, it doesn't work properly at all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Дякую.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Professor Marko Pavlishin. Dear Marko, would you like to ask a question yourself, or should I read it?
Oh, thank you, Irina. I will ask the question. It's in a way a simple one, but a very complicated one as well. And I direct it in the first instance to Oleksandr. It's the question of your relationship to literary tradition. I mean, you come from a kind of a background of, and your whole family comes from a background of engagement with literature. And you wrote a beautiful book, which you finished just before the full-scale invasion, kind of Живі, the living ones, the live ones, about the classics of modern Ukrainian literature. where you almost engage in a dialogue with these characters and about these characters with your father. Tell me, how has your relationship to Ukrainian literary tradition, and maybe to literary tradition in general, changed since the terrible events of the 24th of February and what happened later? You're muted, I think, Oleksandr.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Professor, because your amazing works, that was a guideline for myself to go through the Ukrainian classics. For sure, the Kobylanska work is one of the greatest literary research books in the Ukrainian literary studies, because it's basically the way I wanted to talk about them as as about persons, and your book is just an amazing example of how it should be done through the archives and going through everything. And that was some kind of torch for going through this literary classic adventure or quest. I would say that the work on this book that we conducted throughout the whole 2021, just before the invasion, and the working through this life stories and going through all these writings, it actually compiled my understanding of what should I do during the invasion. And it actually, my views and my understanding of Ukrainian history went far, far right during this research. And as much as I get more and more national oriented through this work, as it showed me the way to go to the armed forces. And this was probably one of, because I truly understood what will be next if we are not involved in the armed forces, as Russia has only one way, one option. It will exterminate everybody, and intelligentsia will be the first one who will be executed. And so this research, it showed me the way into what I'm supposed to do. So when I've reread the book in 2023, and me and my father, we prepared it with our new eyes, I haven't changed anything. I've just cut it as I thought that I became more matured writer since writing The Language of War. So I understand how it might works better in the simpler way. So I've just edited, and I haven't added anything except the afterward of the invasion and telling the story of my parents and what happened to them during the occupation of Bucha. And but what has changed, I think, the understanding of how fragile we are, and the understanding. I lived with this throughout the last 5 years before the invasion, since I did the I Will Mix Your Blood, because the core concept was about fragility and how fragile our life is. But since the invasion, I think the understanding of the fragility of Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainian identity, and how we should be thankful for the previous generations, and this understanding of the gratitude, it became more and more in terms of the gratitude to those who preserved Ukrainian culture, and those who preserved the Ukrainian language, and those who dedicated themselves. And this especially, I mentioned this in the foreword, not only in terms of the writers themselves, but the researchers who dedicated their lives to research on Ukrainian literary classics and Ukrainian contemporary literature and providing their books. That's why we have this ground or basis that we could stand on it, and we could discuss this in our new way, at least trying to find our new perspective on this. So this is something like this. So the book hasn't changed a lot. It just became dense a little bit, more like, I don't know, 5-7% denser. But in terms of the understanding, it's just a huge gratitude, and that's it.
And Irina, if I could ask Eugenia a
Sure.
question as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Eugenia, thanks for your lovely books. I mean, I read them with such enjoyment. And they're written, I think, with such incredible empathy for the characters that you evoke so well. Look, in the last one, you know, the sheep are still the sheep are still in one piece, or one of the central characters is a researcher, a researcher of folklore, and it's wartime, but she's still gathering information about customs and beliefs. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, what is the significance in the book of folklore, of folk ways and of folk perceptions, and maybe more broadly, what's the significance of it in Ukrainian society today in wartime?
Thank you, Marco. It will be one of the happiest days of my life that Marco Pavlishin complimented me on my books. That's I'm very happy about that. Thank you so much. As for the folklore, I think that I wanted to give the story this background because those folklore elements that are so deeply integrated in our everyday lives, not just in the villages, but also in the families, the very urbanized families, they are still there. We are still not, we have many superstitions, we have many things that are, that come from this folklore, that have these folklore roots. So I wanted to somehow connect this background and the events that are happening in Ukraine at the moment to show that this is just one Ukrainian world. And actually, the researcher, she is somehow lost in this world of migration, displacement. She doesn't know exactly where she belongs to. Maybe this is her way of reuniting with her, with Ukraine, because she's living abroad and still she wants to somehow reunite with her homeland. So I think this is not just a decorative moment there. It's more about reuniting with yourself and realizing that these roots are so deep and these roots are so important for us that it's really very, very difficult to drive Ukrainians away from their land. I think it's one of the most difficult tasks that a foreign army may have. And as we can see, that it's just impossible to drive Ukrainians away even from the front line. And sometimes it's very sad that so many people stay in extremely dangerous areas, but still they say that I will not abandon my khatka, my house, my cow, whatever. I think those are one of the to me, I think those are the saddest events in this war is when Ukrainians are losing their yards, their houses, and have to say goodbye to them. We have some videos, documentary videos about people who are like saying goodbye to their cows. That's just unbearable to me. So it was more about those roots.
Thank you, Marco, for bringing such questions, and thank you, Evgenia and Oleksandr, for your eloquent answers. Now we have another question from one of our guests. I will read it from the chat. Thank you both for your time, for this very insightful discussions. Have you found that broader collective and national narratives sometimes shape, support, or place tension on how you write and what you write about? Yeah, if you one of you can answer, this would be great. Thank you.
I will just give a quick answer because I think it's very obvious here that even this war, it's a part of a long-lasting battle. So I think we are the part of this collective memory. Our families are the part of this collective memory, and if we are part of both myself and Oleksandr, we are both from the families who somehow managed to preserve some family memories, the memories of the Soviet occupation, that they somehow gave us this knowledge about the past. So yeah, I feel myself as a part of this collective memory, and I just feel that I have this my tiny bit that I am contributing to this entire corpus of knowledge.
Yeah, thank you, Eugenia. If Oleksandr have any reflections, you can add. No. Well, thank you. I think if we don't have any, I will give a few seconds for our guests to think if they would like to raise hand and ask probably the one of the last questions, or then we will probably wrap up as our guests are joining now in the morning in Ukraine and have to go and work. And also people here in Melbourne probably will have also some time for dinner. So probably we don't have any questions, and I think I will wrap up this webinar. Thank you so much again for our invited guests and our distinguished writers. And I would like to say a few words about the series of these webinars, as this is the last one that we started this year. The series Ukraine Writes Back, Writers, Poets and the War are co-hosted by a research initiative on post-Soviet space at University of Melbourne and the Ukrainian Studies Association of Australia and New Zealand. And as you can see, these webinars brought together leading Ukrainian writers and poets in 4 powerful webinars during this year. In May, we invited Oksana Lutsishina and Oksana Maximchuk to read from their recent work in conversation with Professor Marko Pavlyshin. This webinar was followed by Katya Mikhalitsina and Irina Starovoit in dialogue with Associate Professor Alessandro Achille, and they spoke about intersections of personal experience, memory, and the war. In September, Victoria Grivina and Yarina Chernoguz reflected on living and writing amidst bombardment and living in and military service. Today, we have an honor to hear reflections of Oleksandr Mykhed and Eugenia Kuznetsova in conversation with Olga Maxwell. And on behalf of organizers, I would like to thank to the writers for their honest conversations, their reflections, for sharing the craft of how they are writing and their emotions while writing. I would like to thank to our audience who joined our webinars throughout the several months and for their time and support of this initiative that keep us running. And also would like to thank to my colleagues here who are part of both initiatives of both research groups for their support and for the initiative of this idea. And there are Professor Marko Pavlyshin, who is here, Professor Julie Fedor, Dr. Olga Maxwell, Professor Mark Idele, Associate Professor Alessandro Achille. These conversations reminded us of the power of literature and why it is important to carry memory, to carry word, and really appreciate the meaning of every word in your writing. And these conversations are about resilience, about Ukrainian society, about the space for reflections and solidarity with Ukrainians in Ukraine, first of all, and many Ukrainians around the world who are joining us to listen and to hear you. So thank you so much, everyone, and I'm really looking forward to buy your books, to open your books next time, and thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for invitation and for insightful conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, it was an absolute privilege.